Hello, today is Monday, September 30th, 2024, and my name is Colin Goldberg, and I'm here with the artist cari shim, who is going to be curating an upcoming exhibition, which is going to be done in collaboration with the Techspressionist community. And I'll just hand it off to cari if you want to tell us a little bit about the show and about your museum and um, kind of however you want to frame it.
Sure. Thank you, Colin. Thanks for hosting us. And myself and Joey Zaza, who co-founded the museum together in 2020. We're into our fourth year, and we are very excited to be collaborating with the Techspressionists for this upcoming exhibition. It's our 11th exhibition. We are a digital online museum that was founded in the times of lockdown in the pandemic, when artists had literally no place to put their work because everything was being canceled or postponed. And it was the catalyst of the Whitney Biennial announcing that they would postpone by a year that led us to say, hey, let's just do it anyways. Let's do our own biennial. And so we founded Mauna. We created the Museum of Wild and Newfangled Art. And we had an opening show to launch the museum. And then the very next show was the biennial. And that was a very prolific and successful exhibition. And that propelled us into this work of online digital archival. And we eventually stumbled into Web3 and started working with blockchain, and have done numerous exhibitions in tandem, I would say, like in community with Web3. We exhibit on our site, which is the online museum, and we also exhibit on the blockchain. And now we are in partnership with Loop Art Critique, and we're also exhibiting in the metaverse. So that's really exciting to have our own Mauna room with the Loop Art Critique, which is Ariel Robbins, and also the Mud Foundation supporting that. So we also came upon the Techspressionists through some of the artists being in our exhibition. So Tommy Mintz showed up in our first biennial 4 years ago, and Renata showed up. We found Renata actually on the blockchain. Joey found Renata. And so we were slowly like accumulating these Techspressionist artists, and we were like, what is this? So we started looking into it, and Joey watched all the salons.
Amazing.
Yes, and started attending them, and we were thinking about what our next exhibition would be, and we are like, hey, why don't we work with the Techspressionists and create a partnership, and also onboard this community, some of which are already on the blockchain, but really to onboard them as a group and say, let's look at these artists and what they're doing, because what the Techspressionists are doing is very similar to what we're doing in the ways of community building and gathering people from all around the world through the online, infrastructure of the web.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Awesome. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergy, between what you guys are doing and what, the Techspressionist community is doing.
Mhm.
I think it's really interesting, the different approaches, how Mauna, and you guys personally, I believe, kind of consciously stay away from social media. And like that's kind of been the medium where I initially started locating the
Mm,
artists to come into the group. So it's like two different angles. But
mm,
like, Tommy and Renata like were people that came in through one door on your side and another door on my side. And I remember Tommy actually talking about you guys and minting with you and other stuff like that quite a while back. And I was like, huh, that sounds interesting, just kind
mm.
of the name of it and everything like that. So yeah, very cool. And that's going to be opening on October 3rd. Is that correct?
That
The
is
the date? So
correct.
it is
Yes.
coming up very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's going to be actually happening at our upcoming salon. So it'll be a live launch and exhibition opening, which is really exciting.
Hmm.
And it was good to see you in Brooklyn a little while back and just to, have you and Joey participate in the show there.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really cool. So I just wanted to, open up with that just because we're, coming into this show very soon. And this, I think, is going to be of interest to the participants and also the larger community just to get to know you guys. I believe Renata is going to be interviewing Joey as well. So, I think the audience in Techspressionism or people who are just watching some of our content, will benefit from getting to know each of you as individual artists as well.
Hmm.
Um, that being said, I'm going to kind of dive into this interview format, which was actually created by Roz Diamond back in
Thank you, Ross.
2021. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's served us very well. And actually, I told her about this book that my daughter's been reading and called The Wild Robot, and she got a kick out of that because the central character is a robot named Roz. We actually
Oh.
just saw the movie yesterday, actually, my daughter and I, which was really good. All about a robot stranded on an island, and the robot got to know all the animals and influenced by them. Very cute, but also I feel like it's kind of a sign of the times, in terms of what's going on in our society in general. So really
Hmm.
interesting. But at any rate, that's a sidebar. So we'll
I
open
wrote
up.
it down. I'm gonna get the book.
Yeah, it's amazing actually. It's really cool. Her entire school district actually is reading the book, all the different, grade levels, elementary through middle school. And yeah, really there's a whole series of them. So it's really good.
It's interesting
Um,
to see the word wild being used so widely. It's really,
yeah, that's funny
it's
actually. I didn't even
mhm,
think about that. But yeah, it's,
mhm, mhm,
that's true. Yep, the wild robot. And, the robot kind of identified in that way because of its connection or her connection. I don't know if the robot has a gender, but she, I think, did identify in that way. And identifying with these animals, though, and how the robot learned to tap into sort of an emotional center, which is different from how she was programmed. And I think that, all of this kind of relates in a roundabout way to, what we're doing in terms of tech expressionism and what you guys are doing. So it's kind of cool. Um, it's all part of the zeitgeist, I guess,
yeah, yeah.
of how these these robots or bots or AI based entities are starting to interact with humans and humanity, and it's an ever evolving tale. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, such as where you're born, where you live and practice now, and maybe some of your cultural influences?
Okay. So this one, I'm just gonna kind of come at this from some different places. I'm from the 70s. I um, am from a legacy of colonization, and I am from a family that's living on stolen land. And I am coming from the ancestry of French Huguenots, which were fleeing from being persecuted in France. So my family was coming over here in the 1600s and started in Salem, and then moved their way up into the north, landing in a small town in Pennsylvania called Northeast. It's near Erie on the lake, and are farmers. So I come from a family of farming, and some of them are still farming. Actually, my uncle is today harvesting grapes for Welch's and
Nice.
also for some local wineries. And I come from the 90s in Los Angeles, performing performance art in the underground art scene that was happening there. And I come from Burning Man. I come from the playa, from Black Rock City, having spent 9 burns out there over a period of 20 years. And now I'm coming from New York City, um, from the Lenape lands and the Mannahatta peoples. And I'm really coming from a place of understanding where I'm coming from and really working on that, and really going deep into that kind of question, whereabouts, you know. Um, and I was actually born in Delaware, which kind of has nothing to do with any of that, and relocated to California at a very young age. And when I returned to New York, I realized that I am from the East Coast. I really am. So that's kind of a long way around. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, really interesting answer to that question. I don't think I've ever had um, an interview where it was so heavily based in sort of social deconstruction, so to speak, or however you'd
Mhm.
want to call it, but very interesting.
The
And so,
academia in me.
well, I mean, it's what keeps things interesting. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and also I wanted to say, it's nice to have you involved in the group, in the community in that way, and that, I've always thought of Techspressionism as something that's based on self-identification. It's an idea. I think ultimately that's the greater umbrella that has the community under it and all the activities. And if people identify with this idea of technology being used in sort of an emotive way or connecting with personal I guess, using technology in a personal way. I think that's really interesting. And I looked a little bit at your background in terms of your being involved with dance and other art forms, in addition to visual art. And so segueing into that, the second part of this question is cultural influences. Do you have any specific cultural influences that you'd like to talk about?
Mm, cultural influences. I mean, I come from like a family of feelers and seers and knowers. Um, so a lot of mm, different ways of being in relationship with spirit world, I would say. And also coming from a culture of nature worshiping and like being in touch with the land and cycles and seasons and weather. Weather's like really important in my cultural um lineage. Uh and then there's also like a lot of history and like mystery, I would say, mystery and hidden things also that are I think, a bit of an influence that have led me to go into deeper investigations of like the family system and legacy and mm, that kind of like yearning for ritual. Yeah, yearning for ritual and then bringing ritual back into practice. Um, mhm. And food. Food's been a very important, influential part of my family and the cultures that I'm coming from. Really big on
Mhm.
food. Hmm.
Right on. Well, I could identify with that. Um, um, so what made you become an artist, or when did you know this is what you wanted to do?
Mm. I mean, becoming like I became from my parents, they helped me to become, and I think that uh, they created a space that allowed for creativity. So I would just honor them in that. My dad was always like blasting music. I grew up in a house full of music, and my mom was always dancing jitterbug in the kitchen. And my dad, I grew up on the racetracks of Watkins Glen, watching the race cars go by really loud. And my dad would be photographing them. And then when we weren't at the Glen, we were like sitting in front of a pull down screen watching the slides on the slide projector of the images. So I think that really created my understanding of framing and um, yeah, composition. And my mom was at home with me for, I think, the first 11 to 12 years of my life. So there was always a lot of creativity happening at home. So we were always working on projects together, making things, and she was always making things. My dad was always making things too, like woodwork, and he made a lot of things for me as I was growing up. So just like bearing witness to the creativity of my parents, I think really uh, initiated it. Hmm.
And at what point do you think you, or did you at some point decide, this is what I want to do? Like,
Yeah,
in this
yeah,
sort of stereotypical, oh, when did you
yeah.
declare your major or
Right,
whatever?
right.
Like, was there like an aha moment when you were like, you know what, like, I think I want to do this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to like point out the moment of when I started saying I am an artist, because
Mm,
that was like a really pivotal um moment.
mhm.
And it was hard. It was really hard at first to just be able to say I am an artist and to move away from the things that I had been studying, because I started studying music at a young age, piano at like 8, I think, and French horn all through high school. And French horn got me a scholarship into college at UCLA to be a music major. And also dancing from 12, so studying tap ballet, jazz techniques. So all of that, like studying, accumulating. I'm a I'm a French horn player. I'm a I'm a musician. I'm a dancer. And then going into um, college, and just like I hated the music program and I left it, and I moved over to the World Arts and Cultures slash dance program. I wanted to go to school for dance. My dad said, "Why don't you do music instead? It's better." Like he thought that that was like a better career option for me. And it was like a guaranteed way of getting a scholarship. So that's what I did. And then I like threw it all out the window and went to dance. And it wasn't until like graduating from my undergrad degree at UCLA that I was getting this question of like, what do you do? And I would say I'm a dancer, and it was the 90s, so everybody thought I was a stripper. And so I had to change that answer. So it's like, what do you do? I'm a choreographer. Oh, like, what is that? I don't understand. And that sounds what? And so then it finally got into like, what do you do? And it's like, I'm an artist. And then what kind of art do you do? And then you have this long list of things that you have to say you do. And then in 2013, I think I read The Artist's Way, and I started doing all of that work, and I landed on this answer of I'm a wild artist, and that's when I started using that. And then people would not ask me any questions. And I was like, I finally found it. Like, I am a
It's
wild artist.
okay. Oh. Nice.
Yeah. But it was really hard to like, I don't know about you, like when you first start saying I am an artist, like it's like so vulnerable. It's such a and the things people say to you, just like having
Hmm.
to receive all of these different perceptions of what that means.
Right, sure. I mean, I kind of feel like for me, I always kind of identified in that way, and that was always something that I did from being a kid on, and I never stopped. But there definitely was a point, and I think it was in undergrad, where I kind of decided, you know what, um, this is what I'm gonna do. Like, and so much of how we formulate our identities, I think, is based on that. What do we actually do to earn a living, or what do we do when we get up every day? And
Yeah.
it was actually it was through working with another one of the artists in the community, actually, one of the artists who helped formulate the group was in the first salon, Steve Miller. And I saw what he was doing in the studio. I was a teenager, an undergrad, and I was like, huh, this is something that people do. I never actually encountered anyone who was a practicing artist before that, other than, with my art professors, my painting professors, but they were academics primarily, you know what I mean? So to come into a studio, see that this was, somebody's life, how they function day in and day out, and that only a small percentage of it really was involved in the making of the work. There was so much else around it to support that life, studio practice, everything. So it's a real eye opener.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so kind of coming back into influences, besides the sort of cultural influences, do you have any specific artistic influences that you'd like to speak to?
Yeah, I'd like to bring Frida Kahlo into the room. Um, I was living in San Diego from like around 8 years old through high school, living in Poway actually, which is like part of San Diego County. So close to the border and going to Mexico a lot. And the vibrancy of the art in Mexico was very attractive to me. The use of color. Actually, that's an aha moment for me right now, is like that's probably where the color is coming from. Because I use a lot of color in my work. It's probably from that initial kind of flourish of being exposed to Mexico and its art and its artists at such a young age. Mm. And Frida, I mean, everywhere I looked, it was Frida. And I was like, who is this woman? And of course, like being a female, I was attracted to that because I wasn't really seeing it otherwise. And I loved the self-portraiture. Um, and I looked into her story and it was just so captivating. And she became more than just an artist to me, just like a a pivotal figure of resilience and persistence and tenacity and strength and divine femininity and style and fashion and just like so much. So yeah, definitely Frida. And also Dolly, my best friend, her parents had art on the wall and then had these coffee table books, and one of them was Dolly, and I would always look at that book and just loved the images in there, and really grew up with that appreciation of surrealism and Dolly. And then and then in my 40s it all fell apart when I read The Black Dahlia and realized yeah, it took me 40 years to realize that the surrealists were actually very violent towards women. And the whole movement was based around this like dissection of the female body, and that woke me up in this new way. And that's where that piece came from, the Man Ray piece that was exhibited at the Kingsborough Art Museum. I just wanted to like flip it and look at like what is female gaze, and um what does it mean to look at a male body from a female perspective, and what if I do this like dissecting thing as a conversation with Man Ray of like, cutting things apart and dismembering and disfiguring. And so that was a real big moment for me where I just kind of like everything, the floor fell out from underneath me um with that influence. And yet I'm still like, I would say heavily influenced by surrealism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting how work changes as we get older and we look at
Yeah.
the things that really used to captivate us and then coming back, I was definitely yeah, surrealism was a huge influence on me as well, and I think that you know, it still is to some degree, although I kind of put it down.
Mhm.
But then I can't help but picking it up just to look at the quality of how well these imaginary scenarios were executed, for better or worse in terms of if you want
Yeah.
to dissect them psychologically and pick them apart, that's a whole other story. But just the
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
painting aspect of it, I think, is hard to deny. So,
Yeah.
um,
And so surprising, when I saw my first Dolly in person, I was shocked at the scale of it,
mm,
because I was looking at these coffee books and the images were much larger than the actual paintings.
hmm
So when I
yeah,
saw
yeah,
it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so small. Um,
hmm
so that was stunning.
yeah. I feel the same way. Looking at his work or a lot of the surrealist work. You just get this feeling that they're just very large scale pieces until you see it in person. And I had the opposite effect when I saw my first Pollock at MoMA in
Mhm.
person, where, in reproduction, I'm like, all right, I mean, I get it. He drips some paint, but then it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're in front of it. And to me, it was just like, just falling into the piece, this whole
Yeah.
other aspect of dimensionality when something is of scale like that. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting to see something physically versus in reproduction for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so before we look at your work, can you tell us a little bit about your process? I know you work in a bunch of different modalities, so if you think
Yes.
there's anything in particular that cuts across them or any certain, body of work that you'd like to discuss in particular.
Yeah. Um, I would say that the work comes from my body, and that my body is the source. The body acts as a conduit for the work. to come through, and that my ideas or my concepts come generally from dreams or visions. And I'm always like in the act of like making things move, I would say. Movement is very at the heart center of the work. Um, and my practice has definitely like really developed over the years, and is now like become something quite profound, I would say. It's taken a while to really like develop the practice and to even like be aware of it and understand it. And now it's a lot about taking an image and setting it up, and then investigating it from the inside through improvisation, and through the use of the morphic field and um, generativity, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Can you speak about this, the morphic field? And I'm not super familiar with that term, so
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah, the morphic field is a scientific term, um, and uh, it is the idea that every body has this energy that's coming out from the body, and when bodies gather in a group, they share these energies, so it creates this field. And it can also be thought of as like collective memory, morphic resonance, and it's a way of information that's being shared in a nonverbal way. Uh, for example, if you were to be in a room of people taking a test and you were to wait until like most of the room had completed half of the test and you started then, you would have more correct answers based on the field of like this shared knowing.
mm,
And this field can be used in a myriad of ways, and it's used by animals for passing information. It's used by humans for passing information. And it's also used in specific kinds of therapy. Family and systemic constellation therapies is the field, which is where I got introduced to it and realized that I've been working with a field in my dance practice for quite a long time. Uh, and yeah, it's just this like divine state of knowing and understanding beyond yourself through a shared collective field of memory and systems.
really interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd heard something similar about that. I think it was dealing with like the New York Times crossword puzzle, where like
Mhm,
once
mhm.
it came out, it
Yes,
was more easily solved or something like that.
yes,
Like,
yes,
the knowledge was out there
yes.
and it's easier for people to access. Yeah, it's really
Mhm,
interesting. There's definitely something to it, and I think that there's plenty of things that have a valid scientific explanation. It's just that humans haven't really been able to articulate it yet,
mhm,
and I think a
mhm,
lot of
mhm,
times it gets chalked up to sort of hocus pocus or whatever you want to call it, but ultimately, neurons are firing,
mhm,
electrical impulses are happening, and it's all really measurable, through science. So yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it crosses over all sorts of different fields of study. So
mhm,
and it also made me, when you were talking, it made me think about the salons where, there's this group of people all like, experiencing something in real time, responding to somebody sharing about their work, and there's always unexpected things that happen. But it's interesting to capture, you know, uh, an experience that's shared, amongst a whole bunch of different people, and then to be able to look back at it,
Mhm.
it's, definitely something that wouldn't be possible without something like Zoom, like 20
Mhm.
years ago, you couldn't really have that. Um, or even like this, video conferencing in a sense, but having 20 or 30 people involved, I think it really makes it, um, you know, right for surprises and
Yeah,
possibilities. So,
very rich.
um,
Mhm.
do you want to share your screen and, show us some of your work? Maybe you could show us a little bit or speak to how your work has evolved artistically and technically, or, you could, um, however you want to approach it, really. It's kind of up to you.
Okay. Um, yes. So I'll start with my artist statement. My art acts as a window to the soul, a mirror for reflection, a warm refuge for meditation, a generator for embodiment, and a sacred space for healing. My body acts as a conduit, a medium for magic and message to travel through. My practice is generative, embodied soul work. There is power in the question. There is liberation in enjoying the experiment. There is love in the soul. There is magic in the movement. I am here to move things. And this is a girl. It's a GIF, and it's me running through a field in New Hampshire a couple summers ago while they're hunting mushrooms. And I work with GIFs as a way of archiving moments. And I will take us to my website front page. And I wanted to start with Body Landscapes, which is a generative project. It was released originally on FX Hash on December 22nd, 2023. It also has an article attached to it that I wrote on FX Hash. And it is a self-portrait project um, that came to me from a dream. And it's capturing states, emotional states of experiencing cancer during the pandemic. I was diagnosed with breast cancer on March 15th, the day that New York City shut down. So this was a way of processing that experience several years later. And it started as this generative art project and then moved into GIFs that I created that are on, it was exhibited also with the Loop Art Critique and was actually built in Loop Art Critique and has an XR element to it, this room that I created for the exhibit with the bodies, and that's where the GIFs showed up. I created these flashing GIFs. This is an image from inside the XR space. That's me and my avatar, and then those are the GIFs. They're actually flashing, and you can fly through the space, and there's these like layers of these bodies, and my voice is singing inside there. So it turned into these GIFs, which then, here's one of them, which then I took these GIFs and repurposed them into a film, which was shown at, actually, that was the premiere at Kingsborough Art Museum. So I created this short film also titled Body Landscapes, and it's animated from these GIFs. And so the project just keeps growing and growing and growing, and it's been a really wild ride, I would say. That I then turned them into GLBs, some of the GIFs. So it's kind of gone in all directions, and it's just something that I continue to explore. Yeah, let me click out of this. And the film has been a finalist for the New York Animation Film Awards, so that's really exciting. And also has screened at the San Suchi Film Festival and the San Francisco Dance Film Festival so far, as well as being in the Kingsborough Art Museum exhibition of Hello Brooklyn, Techspressionism. So that's been really exciting to see it go all over the place. So that's like a project that's current and ongoing, I would say. I do work in generative AI. I also want to talk about dance prompts. This is a participatory artificial intelligence generative dance project to develop an AI choreographer biased towards inclusive and accessible movement. And this actually came out of the AI curator that Joey and I created for Mauna for the show. This show is curated by a machine we created with Ivy, another artist, another Mauna artist. The three of us created this AI neural network model that could rank and sort images, still images, and we used it to curate a show. And so I was thinking, well, I want to create an AI choreographer that could learn my body, my movements, and then spit out a solo for me to do. Because I was at the time, I was like, I need to do a solo. And then that developed more into how can we create this AI that would give prompts so that anybody could move, because my collaborators, Carson and Demetrius and I, are really into the liberation of dance. So like tearing out the technique and tearing out all of the things that make people think that they're not dancers, and to reintroduce in a way where you can give prompts that would allow any person the desire to move and to be moved. And so we created this whole experience that we showed last year in February at Columbia Barnard in the Movement Lab. And these are images from the area that we set up. This is the playground. There are some rotating projections on the floor. There's a whiteboard. There's we did a exquisite corpse with the audience together. And that was one of the devices we were using. We had this welcome mat, place your feet, take a moment, activate and release. So we had these stages of participation. When you first enter, you would answer these questions: what makes you move? What gets in the way? And you just throw it in the trash. And these prompts, what makes you move, came back to the playground later in the experience. And then here's us in the lab over the summer. We were just continuing to research this and coming up with new prompts, mirrors and different video bars being projected through the space, another whiteboard you'll see there. So this one is continuing to develop, and is a very long-term project. And the next phase will be creating training the neural network with all of these prompts that we generate through these workshops. Shimmer is my inflatable project. They are empathy generators, and there's a very large one, and then there's smaller ones, and the smaller ones have been getting a lot of attention lately because they're just easier to move around, and you can get inside of them, and we take them to places in New York City where people can interact with them. Kids really love them. And they also are exhibiting in different places. This is again at the Kingsborough Art Museum and the Techspressionism exhibit by curated by Tommy Mintz and others. This is at Every Woman Biennial in La Mama Gallery in the Village. And you can see them moving, get an idea of them moving. This is them lit up at night with some nice fiber optic lighting underneath them. They're really gorgeous. They're really fun. That's Carson, one of my collaborators. And the experience of being inside of them is what is generating this empathy of being inside of something that is not square, being inside of a color, being washed by color. That's Demetrius, my other collaborator, Demetrius Charalambous. Having that sort of like return to the womb experience, and also being inside of something where you're not seen and you are of something else. So you're becoming this thing. So it's kind of like a self-forgetfulness or a loss of ego that's happening that really opens up the heart. This is the larger one. It is very big. It's 30 feet in diameter, and then the tentacles go out 50 feet. And yeah, that one, here's my team for the bigger
Wow.
one. Yeah, that one has a sound floor, an interactive sound floor that you can see the pieces there. It's 12-tone sound floor. And when you step on the individual panels, it triggers a note. And right now it's programmed for a 12-tone scale, so that when you're inside of the creature, you can make it sing, which is where the name came from, Shimmer, the singing sea anemone. And the high, deep, and wide like installation is this big anemone surrounded by the smaller anemones, and this experience that people can witness that is like a passage of day to night to day cycling. And the anemone is growing and deflating, inflating. People can go inside. The small anemones are like dancing this ballet, and other things are happening. And because of the pandemic, we were like building, 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 and then the pandemic hit, and this all kind of like ground to a halt. And so now the time is coming back where we're looking for spaces to exhibit this larger beast of an anemone. It does need a very large space, so it's been difficult to find the right location, but we're still looking. So if anybody wants to exhibit a very large anemone. And I think I want to get to some of the pictures. My collaborator who we built together is Mary Hale. I just want to throw that name out there. This is what we did during the pandemic when we couldn't be in person together or be inside of the inflatable. We created this underwater VR 360 experience to just keep working on the project. And that was really satisfying. And that was Mary Hale and myself and Zavi, which was our builder in Unreal. So we had a really good time doing that. So that's shimmer. I have a lot of like ongoing long-term projects, you know. This is my newest piece that I'm working on. I'll come back to it, but I want to talk about my generative dance and I want to talk about my generative art, and the morphic field. So, Warning Sirens is a work that I made in 2019. And this is a GIF that I made from the work of the circling section that has been archived on the Tezos blockchain as a way of thinking about how do you archive performance, especially dance. It's so fleeting. It happens 1 or 2 nights and then it's over, and all you have is like a video or some photographs, and then you never get to like touch it again, really. So um, and then those videos live somewhere that like only a couple people can access. So how do you take something and have the essence of what it was, uh, to archive it? And so I was thinking like these little pieces of the dance that really capture the moment, turning it into this like forever looping thing, and then putting it on the blockchain and saying this happened at this time and here's the information, and it's not for sale, and this is not for sale, this is to archive and say this happened, and this was like the feeling of it, right? Because like when you look at a video of dance, it's just like so flat compared to being in the space and actually experiencing the field of the dance, the morphic field. So this was a piece called Warning Sirens, and I created this fiber optic veil that the piece happened inside of. The dancers were blindfolded in a circle. It was all women, and starting with this investigation of beckoning, conjuring, and warning. This was in 2019. We're at the time of Trump being in the presidency, and dealing with, all of those things of what it means to be a female. What are you at war with? We are working with these questions, answering these questions, uh, which I want to go up to. What are you at war with? What are you fighting for? When will you open your eyes? Will you be ready when the sirens call? So this to me was kind of the beginning of my work as a generative artist, making a dance that was built on a experimental score. So it's always different every time. And I do want to say these images, most of them are taken by Joey Zaza from Mauna. And the sound score I created, and it was just very like loud and looming and ominous and profound sound score. It's rehearsal for the dance. So this dance was, in hindsight, using the morphic field to generate the movement. As I had them blindfolded, they were generating these moves of beckoning and conjuring without seeing each other, and it was really interesting to see what crossed over in the gestures. This is my other generative work, Gorgeous Creatures, a task-based experimental score for creating and holding sacred space. It's a generative dance. Every time it's performed, it's different. And this, again, using these task-based, it's like an algorithm, right? So you're setting up these different tasks that are happening. And this is another GIF that was again minted to the blockchain to archive the flocking section of the dance. Also here we have flying. I really like this one. This one is also on the Tezos blockchain. And shroud, this is a shroud moment from the work. And this work also was using NFTs. So the images that you're seeing on the shroud are from a project called Strange Loop. And they were projected from above and acting as this like cyber layer of magic. This is what we're looking at now. The article that I wrote about this work, it's minted onto the blockchain on FX hash and goes into the development of the work, and the score itself is here in this article. Yeah, some other images from the work, and that's Carson and Demetrius on the side there. We also developed this piece together. They're my long-term collaborators. All right. So this takes us into a little bit into some generative art, because I came to New York in 2015 and started learning coding, creative coding through ITP, and started making work, generative work, and that definitely impacts like how I make everything now. Thinking about code and creative coding and algorithms, and what it means to make something that is ever changing and ongoing, generative. This is my project window, which I so love. It's very minimalist, and it's from the perspective of like an abstract window. And some of these are nighttime nature, and some of these are daytime. Some of these are like cityscapes, and others are more like countryscapes, and wanting to create like a larger installation of these where you see all of them together on the wall, and they're shifting between the black backgrounds and the white backgrounds, with different sound scores of city or crickets in the country, you know, that kind of design. So that's a little bit of my generative art as well as body landscapes, which leads me to this project now, called Hovering, that I'm setting on the students at NYU. And it's about this time we're in now, this like feeling of hovering and not being able to land. But we're in this like constant state of like suspension, and what does it mean to be held, and what does it mean to be holding? And it's about the here and the there and the in between. And this one again is working with the morphic field in a more practice-based way of setting up these images. This is one of the images, and then letting an improvisation happen inside of that image. And yeah, this is something that happened from one of the improvisations where we found a new image, you know. So this is a really exciting progress for me in my practice, is to actually understand now what I'm working with, and then to go further into that investigation of how I can use it as a resource, using the morphic field to embody movement and use it as a practice to develop a generative dance. So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm also working on an XR album with Joey Zaza, and I can't show any of the imagery from that yet, because it's just not quite there. But this is my website. You can kind of go there and see everything I'm doing. I'm working in AI, I'm working in generative AI, and also film, performance, Mauna, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, video art. I do a lot of video artistry for other people. Today I wanted to like really stay focused on my own work, but I do work for other people, and I do create video art for large scale proscenium work for David Rousseff, and for my collaborator Emily Beattie. I'm a cinematographer. I shoot films for directors like Marta Renzi. I work collaboratively with Opera on Tap, and we made a VR project that's a an opera murder project. I do music videos, and yeah, I got to be the first video artist to redesign the Rauschenberg Shiner piece for Trisha Brown's Set and Reset. So yeah, that's what I do. I do lots of stuff for lots of people, but now I'm really focusing on my own work and on exhibiting. I'm really focused on exhibiting. So if anyone wants to exhibit, call me.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much. That was very a very broad cross section, and I think it's interesting how you work across so many different types of media, including performance and sculpture, and the way that technology sort of is woven in, across these different types of practice. That's actually something that, kind of brought me to this idea of Techspressionism, to be honest, is that even though I use computers in my work quite a bit, I still primarily consider a lot of what I do to be painting, although not all of it, and it just never sat well with me to think of that as digital art, even though as soon as people heard that there were computers involved, they said, well, that's digital art. And I thought, no, it's not, and so I had to come up with this sort of way to talk about it. And I think that, um, work that's sculptural or performance based, that incorporates technology into it, is really interesting, and it shows how um, technology is just part of our lives and culture and society now. And it's not this thing where the art has to be defined in that way, and it just is, it's an aspect of living in the 21st century. So, like, it's hard to not have it seep into almost everything that we do creatively or artistically in a lot of ways, even if it's at a subconscious level or actively trying to be avoided. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's very cool. And then, so, I mean, that kind of brings us into our next question, which is what interests you about Techspressionism?
Yeah, I want to say that Marshall McLuhan talks about defining technology as the extension of man, the extension of the body of human. So this is technology, right? And that we're a little bit confused right now by thinking like this is technology. So, you know, it's all technology. Dance is technology, language is technology, like all of these things that we've created that are all around us, it's all technologies. And so there's these old systems that we're almost like losing track of the idea that it is something that we've created and we rely upon, and that it is technology. And then there's these new systems that we're only thinking of as technology. And so just to bring that back to Techspressionism, that what I appreciate the most is that it's looking at the emotion of expression through technology, that it's centered on embodiment, that it's centered on this human experience, and then that's getting translated through whatever thing is the best thing to translate for the concept. I really appreciate that in the definition of it, that has always attracted me, is just like having that word in there of emotion, because it's so integral to our experience and to what art is, if you can even define what art is expressing an experience, expressing an emotion somehow, So that always really has been at the heart of it for me, as well as the inclusivity of it, the ability to self-proclaim yourself, to self-identify yourself as a Techspressionist. And I have recently dropped my wild artist shtick, and I've like moved over to Techspressionist. And that kind of feels really exciting for me to be like, oh, I'm like moving on, like I'm moving into this new way of like calling myself, identifying myself. And that also feels really liberating to step out of this way I've been identifying for so long, and to step into this new way of identifying. And as I step into that, it's this rich community of artists that I step into, and that is the final thing that I'm very attracted to, is just the strong community of people who are showing up and who are nurturing each other and who are creating time and space in an otherwise like hectic, busy, chaotic world where people don't have time and space for anything. People are making time and space for each other and for this practice and for this community, and that is profound. And I'm really happy to be part of it.
Well, thank you. It's always interesting to me how different artists, relate to this idea. And I think it's a very personal um, definition, you know. And I think, expressionism um, is really the foundation of it, and um, one of the artists, I think it was Darcy Gerbar, talked about it, mentioned it as, expressionism for the 21st century. And I think that's a very apt way of thinking about kind of you know, the idea is that it's really just an extension of expressionism. In reality, to me anyway, that the technology component just happens to be a reflection of the times we live in, and I was talking about this to someone recently, how um, expressionism differs from impressionism,
Mm,
and
mm,
how it's it's a representation of an internal state, versus um, a representation of external reality. And that was actually part of the definition of expressionism from the Oxford Dictionary that we kind of scrapped when Helen Harrison, myself, Patrick Lichty, and Steve Miller and Oz Van Rosen, we kind of gathered together for this first salon and
mm,
talked about, the definition. And the previous definition was an artistic style in which technology is utilized as a means to express emotional experience rather than impressions of the outside world or external reality. I don't know exactly. And Helen actually made the case for dropping the word style and replacing it with the word approach, um, which I think is very important when you think about surrealism and how it's sort of united stylistically, versus, in any other way, really. When you think about the work, it's an aesthetic, it's a certain way of representation, and then dropping also this rather than impressions of the outside world, because in the end, there's plenty of people working in a Techspressionist way who are working figuratively, um, or there's this sort of very wide range of styles, and it would be a mistake, I think, to define it as a style. It would be very limiting and produce something that's short-lived. To me, I mean, I don't want to diss any particular thing, but to me, the idea of glitch art, right? I think about that as a style. Like, I think of it and I picture the work and I could pick it out, you know what I mean, in a feed. Maybe, maybe not, you know what I mean? But what I perceive of as glitch, for instance, where to me, um, the work in the Brooklyn exhibition, it's so diverse, but yet knowing the the body of artists very well at this point, I can identify, you know, um, a piece by Renata Januszewska or Tommy Mintz, even if I've never seen it before, Lee Day, like I can, or Lee Schneider, I could pick the work out, um, and they're really not unified under a particular style, which I think is interesting. So I appreciate that, and also, this conversation made me think about surrealism, the surrealists, and how you incorporated the idea of the exquisite corpse, for instance, into your, body of work. And to me, a lot of what I do relates to automatic drawing and the idea of tapping into the subconscious, in a way that I never really know what the piece is going to be. When I started, like the piece behind me that was drawn back, over 20 years ago in Illustrator. And really there was no preconceived composition, which is how most of my 2D work is comes about. And that was definitely, something that drew from the surrealists. So I think that, um, their sort of personal agendas aside, there's always something interesting, to be taken from these different movements. And I think, um, for me personally, like not all our work is necessarily rooted in emotion. Like I think about conceptual art, for instance, and things like that, where, maybe the case could be made that it is really ultimately like what is human, except what differentiates us from machines, right? But I think there's different levels of how um, directly related to an emotional state or feeling, work is. But that's definitely something that I get from your work, is it's very closely linked. And the piece that's in the reel, it actually opens up the reel in the Brooklyn show. And that work, by the way, for our viewing audience, can be viewed on the reel, which is available at techspressionism.com/Brooklyn/reel. And I actually saw, you were one of the artists that I edited into the reel. Actually, I edited the original reel for the Southampton show. And then there was, a bunch of different artists that I received work from through Tommy. And that piece was very compelling. So and I wanted to sort of showcase the new artists, the beginning of the reel. So I actually placed that as the first piece in the reel. And I didn't know the backstory to it, regarding the diagnosis and all this other stuff that's very, intimately personal, um, content, right? And so, to hear about it and to learn about it, it's interesting to, really get some insight into what the work is about, and I think that it just speaks to the idea that you don't need to know what the work is about to appreciate it. It's like, a poem, you don't really need to know what the intent of the author or the poet was to appreciate or have your own interpretation, and I never would have really even thought about that. As an origin story for the work, or when I had spoken with you in Brooklyn too, and you told me that you actually were a professor of dance, I was like, that makes sense. You know what I mean? Now I can understand that work from a different angle. So, and then the final question is, how do you see the future of art? It's a very broad question, but
Mhm. Mm, I definitely think that the blockchain is part of it, uh, as far as future thinking, forward thinking goes. It's just offering so much opportunity as far as the ability to uh, put work onto the blockchain to make that mark and to signify that it is truly yours. And with like in the traditional art world, something like 50 to 60% of work is plagiarized. Um, that the blockchain allows that to not happen, to not have plagiarism in the sense of like, I am the artist, I'm putting it here, I'm saying this is it. And that is a
Or if
very
someone does plagiarize your work, you could always say, well, actually, if we
Mhm.
look back to this particular
Here it
spot,
is. Yeah,
yeah.
right,
Hmm.
right. Exactly. So the archive. And then beyond that, of course, the ability to have it be accessible to the world so people can see it. All they really need is some sort of like connection to internet to be able to experience the work. So it's not just tied up in some like, museum in one part of the world that you can't get to, or in a shipping container, in New York City, or so the accessibility is really huge. And then the ability to buy and sell it on the market and to have royalties, to receive compensation every additional time it's being sold, and to also track that the how the art is moving around, right? So like who's buying it, who's selling it, who's holding it, that legacy, to be able to see it on the actual work. And also the ability to own work by artists that you would have previously not been able to own work by, you know, um, before this blockchain situation, I would not have been able to own a Lorna Mills or a Carla Ganis, and now I can own that artist's work. I can own a lot of artists' work, and I have the ability by owning that work to support that artist and say, yes, please, more. And so this economy that is, you know, digital art as currency, is a really solid way of supporting artists directly. And I see that as a profound future for the art world. Um, yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about a lot, and also thinking a lot about these XR spaces, these metaverse spaces, and how those can grow and build and create community uh, in the art world. I think what you are doing with Techspressionism is also a very like futuristic model of growing a community through this like online world, growing community through the device of Zoom, um, so that you have accessibility for artists all around the world to come together and share work and create a movement. I think that's the future. Um, yeah, and then future high, deep, and wide. Do we have a future? Like how do we build sustainably? How do we um create uh equity, and how do we um build resourcefully as well so that we have a future?
All right. Well, very well said. and I echo your enthusiasm about the blockchain. I personally am an advocate. Um, Found out about it over the course of the development of this project, Techspressionism, very early on. And I immediately saw that this is a huge part of the future of the art industry in a way. Like, the art world is to me, a very loaded term because the way that it had been, what it had referred to in the past was very exclusive, not very inclusive. In fact, the exclusivity of it is what made it the art world, right? As versus the world or the larger world that we live in, So I think almost the blockchain and NFTs created an alternate art world. It's almost like, the Marvel multiverse, where in that version of the art world, the artists run it, right? And the dealers are like, huh? You know what I mean? And very interesting. It really changed the dynamic, I think, of what being an artist means, what being a collector means. I was able to support a lot of the artists in the community after selling some NFTs early on, and started to put together, a Techspressionism collection. And that's just there. You know what I mean? And there's no intention of selling off any of the work or whatever, and I feel like the whole idea of a smart contract, an artist receiving residuals in perpetuity without anyone else having to be involved, without there needing to be a lawyer collecting it or anything. It's in the code, and that's, to me, a beautiful thing. It just is very empowering, I think, to artists. And for better or worse, Beeple and his whole group, the whole phenomenon of Beeple slash Bored Apes slash CryptoPunks, you know, all of that just raised awareness, about technology-based work, the blockchain, and everything. Um, Granted, a lot of it was through sensationalism around the price tags associated with the work, but whatever it took to get people's attention, it showed people that this is not a fringe situation. I forget what year it was, but there was definitely a year where the amount of work sold that was on the blockchain surpassed all physical work, including all auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, everything combined. And that's pretty
2021.
astonishing. Pretty astonishing, yeah,
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
wild. So
Mhm.
it's very cool, and it's cool to see you guys supporting Tezos and Object and FX Hash and all these other, you know, aspects or facets of what the blockchain is. So kudos. Um,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
yeah, I think, it's been a really good conversation. I appreciate the time and all the insight you provided into your work, and I'm really looking forward to this salon that's going to be happening in 2 days and the
Yeah.
opening of the exhibition. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
So
you. Thank you
thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Mhm.
Thank you, Carrie Ann. All right. Well, with that, we will stop recording.
Mhm.
And in three, two, one, and cut.